Alliance, and a great episode for you today. Trita Parsi is with me today. He is co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He is also founder and former president of National Iranian American Council, author of many books, researcher, thinker, and we had a great conversation about some of the protests that were going on in the U.S., our opinions on that, also our perspectives on history and the importance of it, and we really go deep into Iranian and U.S. relations and the history in that, and just geopolitics as a whole. So it was a really, really fun conversation. As always, go on our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6, and you can find in the show description links to all our guests' websites, social media accounts, all that stuff. Also links to all my social media accounts. RV Theory 6 is my Twitter handle. RV Theory 6 is my Instagram handle. The Ripple Effect Podcast has a Facebook page. So does Theory 6, which is my music project. Or you can just look up Ricky Varandas or Ricardo Varandas, and you can find my personal Facebook page. Just let me know you're a listener of the show, and I will have no problem connecting with you. I just want to make sure you're not spam or trying to send me porn. So do that if you would like. And if you have been following me on social media, or you're a Patreon supporter, because I also do have a Patreon page. If you guys want to support the show, please do. Any money helps. If every listener donated $1, I could do this full time. That puts in perspective how every dollar does count and does matter. So with that said, Patreon supporters do know in advance who I'm booking and projects that I'm putting together. So you would have known that myself, Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil Hat Podcast, Charlie Robinson, author and podcaster, and Midnight Mike from the OBDM podcast, they've all been guests on my show. We did a Swapcast not too long ago, and we came up with this idea of getting the whole alternative media together to discuss how we fight back against censorship. Obviously, censorship is a huge issue. The most important thing to me is having the ability to go research a topic and get really interesting perspectives and opinions and different just ideas to help kind of mold my own perspective on things. And that's getting harder and harder. You're being force-fed mainstream narratives, you're being force-fed mainstream media, and alternative media has become harder and harder to find. I mean, I've talked about this multiple times on the show throughout the years, how Google is hard to use. You use Google and you're just going to get, you know what you're going to get mainstream websites, mainstream articles, and that's it. And I think that's a huge issue, because all those alternative media or websites and people and researchers and creators that we used to be able to kind of find and get some really interesting information from, that gets harder and harder to find. So I think we need to do something about it. What should we do about it? I don't know, but we should do something about it. And if you haven't listened to that episode, please do. If there's anybody on that episode that you think I should reach out to, I'm definitely going to connect with a lot of the people who came together on that show. But if there's anybody specific that you really want me to reach out to and put a little bit more effort in getting them on the show sooner than later, then let me know. There's tons of awesome people on there. Ben Swan, Luke from We Are Change, James Corbett, of course. I'm having a brain fart right now. Jeffrey Wilson from The Conspiracy Farm. Those Conspiracy Guys, great podcast. Definitely check that out. Jay Dyer. So tons of really, really great contributors and people who participated in the show. And I can't thank everybody enough. I do hate writing emails now, because that took forever to put together, because I spend so many hours just writing emails in regards to giving people kind of an idea of what we're doing and inviting them, then giving them kind of an idea of how we're going to handle it so nobody talks over one another, and then of course sending them the links and all that stuff. It was a little bit of work, but I think it was worth it. I think we did make some ground. I think many of us connected with people that we might have not connected with before, so that's also good. So hopefully some good comes out of it. Maybe we'll do another one. We'll get some people who were more outspoken. Maybe get Jason Burmis. Maybe get Ernest Hancock, who came on at the end of the show and really gave some really interesting information on how to possibly handle this issue. So maybe get some of those people together and we can discuss it. I think one thing that would be a great idea is everybody keep their own website. I know that's kind of seemed like a little bit of a concern of people. Keep your own website, keep your own YouTube account, keep whatever place you want to put your content. You can keep that there. People like THC, Greg Carlwood, he was on the call yesterday, James Corbett, those conspiracy guys, they have huge platforms. Red Pill, huge platforms. They're doing well. One of those things where like, why change or why make drastic changes and go all on one website? But if we can keep those platforms that we've already grown and we can continue to grow, but yet maybe have a website that is like YouTube or a alternative media website that can suggest you other people who are doing research or content on the topic you're looking for and recommend it, that'd be great. Because right now, if you're looking for interesting stuff on YouTube or on Google, you're not going to be suggested anything that's really interesting. It's going to be all mainstream media bullshit. So, it really is the issue that we need to try to resolve. There used to be this app called Truth Seeker, which just had, I know InfoWars was on there, James Corbett. It basically just gave you, anytime they came out with new content, it just gave you it. And something like that's not a bad idea either. So, I mean, I'm open to all ideas. Hopefully, if you guys listened to the last episode, you realize, like, I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm not trying to start a cult like, hey, everybody, join this website and I'll be the leader and decide what should be or shouldn't be. And then we'll basically be running into the same problems. I really just think that there probably shouldn't be any censorship, regardless how radical their ideas, as long as, and that goes into some gray area too. Like, okay, well, how radical of ideas should there be a threshold? So these are all things I think we're going to continue to discuss, and I guess, like I said on the show, have some more idea sex, which actually wasn't my idea. I believe it was Hunter Motz who said it on one of my past episodes, and he used to have a show, and I think he might still do it with Brian Callen, Mixed Mental Arts, and Hunter Motz has been on the show a bunch of times, and I believe that he's the one who coined the term idea sex, and I really liked that term, and kind of just doing that, just sharing ideas, challenging ideas, and the wisdom of crowds, this idea that we just all come together and we put our minds together and we're going to have better ideas and come up with better solutions than if we were doing it ourselves. So that's it, I guess. And also, if you were following me on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff, anytime I do a live stream show, which most of the time is going to be with Midnight Mike from the OBDM podcast, you'll see the links on my social media account. So please follow me. Give me thumbs up on my videos, subscribe, review, also support all the people that were on the show. Do those type of things too. Subscribe to them, give them thumbs up, support them on Patreon or wherever they are if they do have some way of supporting them. For example, I've been supporting James Corbett for years. It's the least I can do because I listen to him a lot. I want him to continue doing it. So, it's not a whole lot to contribute. So when you can, support people that you love. And if you can't support them financially, like I always tell you guys, share this stuff. Tweet it, post it on your Facebook page or wherever you can. That goes a long way. You never know who's listening, who's going to be a huge fan and might be a future supporter of the show. So keep doing that. I was going to say I'll keep this intro short, but it's probably already 10 minutes. So thanks again, guys, and I will talk to you on the next one. Peace. Thanks so much for being with me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Have you you've been busy, even though with the whole coronavirus thing? I'm sure that kept you. It made the geopolitical stories kind of disappear for a little bit.
It did, but then two things happened that I think kind of has reinforced our message and validated what we've been saying at Quincy, which is, first of all, we saw that the biggest threat to the United States is no longer military threats. It's actually non-military threats that tend to be global common threats. And the U.S. military is a completely useless tool against that. And we've been pouring gazillion dollars of money into the military and left ourselves completely naked to the real problems we face, such as pandemics, climate change, etc. Yeah. And then with the protests that are taking place right now, we also see how the foreign wars are coming home, because the militarization of the American police has been going on for some time, but it has dramatically spiked as a result of the invasion of Iraq. All of that extra weaponry and gears, etc., has gone to the police. Why on earth are police wearing camouflage in U.S. cities?
Yeah, that's something that not a lot of people are aware of. A lot of just leftover stuff from the military, the police got. You know, I think I live in Massachusetts, a town called Ludlow, right outside of Springfield, Massachusetts, and small town, and they have like a Hummer. I remember there was an article about another local town, West Springfield, had like a rocket launcher, and I'm like, why do you guys have all this stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
ridiculous. And the training, the language, I mean, they're talking about battlefields, they're talking about enemy combatants when describing protesters. I mean, this is the argument we had been making. And it actually goes back to John Quincy Adams' speech in 1821, where Quincy got his name from, which is that if the U.S. goes for this type of searching for monsters abroad and all of these foreign interventions militarily, it will actually undermine and cause the United States to lose its spirit, as he said, which anybody's referring to is the liberty and the civil rights that the United States Constitution is supposed to guarantee. That's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, at the same steps, we're...
No, I lost you for a second. Are you still there?
I'm still here, yeah. So yeah, no, it's pretty insane, and I think our hope is that people wake up and recognize that the same type of policing effort that has been done here, that is so militarized, is also the same type that has been done by the U.S. in countries that it has occupied or invaded, and quite, logically, it has created a massive backlash against the U.S. It has fueled terrorism. It's become a tool of recruitment for terrorist organizations because the general population is so negatively reacting to that overuse of force.
Yeah, and the thing is, there is a psychological thing too. People say if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you have all these, you have all the SWAT stuff and all this, military stuff. I mean, I wonder what the psychological effect of a police officer who's wearing all that stuff, where you're almost already prepared for the worst case scenario, which sometimes can spark the worst case scenario.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And just take a look at what Tom Cotton wrote. And he's like, we have to show overwhelming use of force. We saw what the president's spokesperson said, all options are on the table. I mean, this is the language of war. And it's the language that they very comfortably, very quickly resort to in dealing with a domestic protest. That is America's foreign wars coming home. I have a very hard time seeing that we could have gone in this direction in the absence of these different wars, these endless wars that just keep on going and going and going. And it's not a coincidence that the very same people that tend to be in favor of bombing every place on this planet, whenever there's a problem, they're immediately going for a military solution, now are also going for a military solution for a domestic protest issue that they're facing.
And, I mean, you think about how people get upset when they see the military on the streets and how it affects them, and it's like, well, the military shouldn't be used for this. I mean, think about if you were Iraq or you were in, any of the countries we've occupied throughout the years. When you see U.S. military there, I mean, that's the same type of psychological effect you're going to have on their people, only it's worse because it's foreign military. It's not even domestic military.
Exactly. And some of those techniques, apparently, such as, kneeling on people's heads and stuff like that, comes from dealing with the type of protest resistance, whatever you would get in those countries that the U.S. has occupied. It's a very common method used by the Israeli police in occupied Palestinian territory. And, at some point, we do have to ask ourselves, how come that language, that mindset, those techniques, those equipment are just so seamlessly coming home and being used against the American population who have constitutional rights to protest. And could this have happened had it not been for the militarization of American foreign policy? Can we militarize our foreign policy and not expect it leading to the militarization of our society?
Yeah, and you know, the other thing too is everything's a political argument. It's like nobody just looks at each specific situation and tries to come up with a conclusion based on that. It's all about defending whatever your party or your ideology would defend. And you know, you look at the protests when it was people protesting for the lockdown. You know, one side was against it, the other side was for it. And then people are protesting now. It seems like it's, you know, the roles have reversed. And I'm one of those people where I'm just like, you know what, I'm for protesting regardless. You know, I mean, I'm not for looting and I'm not for people damaging things. And I think there is a, you know, there's some real question about, you know, you hear stories about the pallets of bricks that are showing up. How did those get there? You hear stories. I mean, and the thing is, like, when you look at, you know, a subject that you know a lot more than I do about, you know, Iranian history and whatnot. But when you look at the coups in Iran and many other places, obviously the U.S. is very good, and the tactics are very good in regards to, like, maybe getting people to react a certain way or do a certain thing and make something look natural and organic, but it was really possibly provoked by other, you know, outside influences. And I think that's always something that's a possibility too. You know, maybe there is some outside influences that want to loot and cause damage to discredit the movement. Maybe it is the movement, you know, doing it. Who knows? Or people that say that they're a part of the movement or whatnot. But there's bad apples in all aspects of life. I mean, you're going to get people who protest who really truly believe in change and making a difference, and then you're going to get a couple bad apples who are going to show up and try to make things worse, or don't care about that and make this peaceful protest a bad thing by being violent and increasing you know, tensions between the police officers or whatnot. And you know, so I think a lot of these conversations, the unfortunate thing is it's really hard to find people who just want to discuss ideas and aren't just defending one side or the other.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair.
And I think with Iranian history, it's similar too, because, you know, I've had people on like Scott Horton, which you're familiar with, and others who have one perspective on Iranian history, but then you also hear another aspect of Iranian history where some people talk about the flaws of the Iranian government and some of their history, and even Iranian history isn't black or white, correct?
Of course. No, it's very complicated.
And for people who don't know, because I think one thing that is really interesting is that how a lot of people will, you know, they know that Iran and U.S., there's tension there, but a lot of people don't know the history of it. They don't know why. And I always tell listeners, I'm like, listen, follow those steps backwards and you'll find out how we got here. You have to learn history to understand how we got here in the first place. Yeah. And the reason why some Iranian people dislike American government or some of their foreign policy or whatnot, I mean, there's a deep-rooted reason for that. It's not just because they, you know, like a lot of media will tell us, it's because they hate us because we're free and, you know, and all this stuff. It's not because of that. There's actual reasons for that. So for people who are listening who might not be aware of some of the first events in Iranian and American history that caused this tension that's been going on for a long time, what are those initial events that you think that are important for listeners to understand?
So the most important thing is that, you know, for most Americans, Iran enters their consciousness in 1979 because of the hostage crisis. For Iranians, the United States entered into Iranian consciousness positively at first, already in the early 20th century, which was mainly because the United States was actually a strong anti-colonial influence, and it was quite sympathetic to Iran and other countries that were fighting against colonialism from Britain and other powers. And also because there were actually specific Americans who were involved in helping the Iranian people in that situation. One of them was a gentleman by the name of Baskerville, who actually helped the Iranians as they were fighting to establish a constitution for themselves in 1906. He actually died fighting for Iranian freedom back then. But all of that changes in 1953 when the United States is convinced by the Brits to get rid of Iran's democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, and give the Shah of Iran essentially complete power. And the reason the Brits was against this is because Mossadegh had committed the sin of trying to seek nationalization of Iranian oil and making sure that the Iranian state would at least receive 50% of the income from the sale of Iranian oil. Up until that point, the Brits were actually getting all of Iran's oil completely for free. It didn't pay anything, and they were only willing to offer, I think, a little bit less than 10% of the revenue, and the Iranians had the audacity of asking for 50%. Mossadegh took the Brits to the International Court in Hague. He won. The Brits imposed an embargo on the Iranians, but the Iranians stood firm. But ultimately, by convincing the United States that Mossadegh may not be a communist, but he may turn communist, the United States stepped in, got rid of Mossadegh in a coup that they funded, reinstated the Shah as the sole decision maker in Iran, and he ended up becoming even more brutal and repressive after that. And he reigned for another 25 years. And for a lot of Iranians at that point, the Shah became the American Shah because he didn't have that degree of public support. The US got rid of essentially a nascent democracy that was being formed in Iran in order to support the Shah, a dictator by all accounts. And this was a key driver of the anti-American sentiments that existed in 1979 when the Iranians did a revolt against the Shah, got rid of him. Unfortunately, they replaced him with an even more repressive political system in many ways. But the U.S. was not an innocent bystander from the perspective of a lot of Iranians. They viewed those last 25 years as a direct result of the United States not only getting the Shah, taking him to power, but also keeping him in power for those 25 years.
Yeah, because the hostage crisis, it just, a lot of people are familiar with it, not because they actually have read historical events or writings of it, but because of the movie that came out. And the thing about a lot of these movies, they have this very pro-American kind of shade to it. And did you watch that movie? I mean, what are some of the biggest?
Argo?
Yes, Argo. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think?
I watched it, and I mean, it's only reflecting a specific
perspective,
part of what happened back then. And there were a lot of criticism from all different kinds of directions. I personally didn't have much problems with it because it wasn't really about the hostage crisis. It was about how they were trying to get some of those American diplomats out. But the best book on this, in my view, is that by Stephen Kinzer, All the Shah's Men, and hopefully one day it may make a movie about it, because I think it would be quite valuable for the American public to better be acquainted with what has happened in their own history and how that has affected other countries. That's not to say that, that in of itself will resolve everything, but the more we have an understanding of the perspective of other countries, the better we will be able to address them. And that's only to our own benefit.
Yeah, Stephen Kinzer's been on the podcast. He does awesome work. Yeah, I highly recommend that too. Do you remember seeing? There's also a pretty good documentary on PBS Frontline did called "Bitter Rivals," I believe, about Saudi and Iran. Did you watch that? Were you a part of that? I feel like I've saw you.
I did watch it. I think I may have been part of that one, or something else did on the same issue.
And that's, I think, another really interesting aspect to the story, because some of the tensions between U.S. and Iran aren't only because of Iran and U.S. history, but because of Saudi history with Iran, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, particularly right now, the Saudis have a big fear, which is that the United States is going to leave the Middle East, and as a result, the very beneficial position the Saudis have had in the sense of being able to enjoy a tremendous amount of leeway, maneuverability, and security, which largely is because the U.S. has been supporting Saudi Arabia. They're very much worried about losing that. And so they want to keep the United States involved, if not trapped, in the Middle East. And they want the United States to tip the geopolitical scales in Saudi Arabia's favor by going to war with Iran. I mean, former Secretary of Defense Bill Gates gave comments to his French counterpart in 2010 after just having left Saudi Arabia. He said the Saudis want to fight the Iranians to the last American. And they've been constantly pushing for that confrontation. Even the king of Saudi Arabia in a meeting with the Americans said you have to cut off the head of the snake being Iran. So the U.S. has constantly been pushed in that direction, partly by Saudis, certainly by the Israelis, and also by the UAE. And the issue, in my view, is not that, the Saudis are wrong or the Iranians are right or the U.S. needs to be, involved. The bottom line is a lot of these fights actually don't really impact American interests to that extent. Certainly it would be better for the United States to have stability in the region, and I think you should try to contribute to that. But what we have done so far is that we've actually gotten ourselves involved in these fights. We've become a party to these conflicts in a way that is really unhelpful for stability in the region, certainly does not serve U.S. interests, and has actually made those conflicts more protracted and more difficult to resolve. If anything, we should push the region as a whole to, through diplomatic means, negotiate their own security architecture and make very clear the United States is not going to be dominating the Middle East militarily for much longer. We're going to draw our troops home. That's what the American public wants. It doesn't serve our interests. It doesn't serve stability in the region. In fact, it has disincentivized countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE from pursuing diplomacy because it's actually easier and better for them to lobby Washington to take care of their problems rather than militarily, rather than them themselves engaging in diplomacy to find solutions with their neighbors on the conflicts that they have. And that, I think, actually would be better for the region and certainly would be better for the United States. And it means, we're not taking sides. We're not saying the Iranians are right or the Saudis are wrong or anything like that, because that approach is part of the reason why we were having these endless wars in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and people don't realize how much of taxpayers' money goes to this stuff. I mean, you're talking about the Shah. I mean, the CIA trained the Shah's secret police. I mean, there's, people. I'm sure, if listeners of this show are very, very familiar with the Afghan war, that when the Soviets went there and us funding Bin Laden, and we've been doing this stuff forever, where we're just throwing American resources to people that become enemies, to people that end up hurting others, and you saw it in the School of Americas. Where was that? In like Georgia, with all the basically murderers that were training there that end up getting involved in Central America, and it's just it's a huge issue. So much of our taxpayer money goes to bloodshed, and a lot of times conflicts that Americans aren't even aware of, or they don't even understand. And that's the thing about the Middle East. The Middle East is complicated. It is, you do have to learn some history to kind of understand the conflicts. But a lot of the stuff is provoked, right? I mean, it's not just because, I think a lot of people from the outside looking in, it seems complicated. They just think, oh, it's all because they just don't get along. We should just get out of there. But a lot of the reasons why certain countries don't get along is also because of the U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, no, U.S. interventions have certainly not been helpful. It's really difficult to make the argument that they have. In fact, we take a look at the Middle East, we complain about how unstable it is, but the reality is that at the end of the day, the most destabilizing event in the Middle East in the last 40 years has been the invasion of Iraq. Nothing has destabilized the Middle East as much as that, and we're still seeing the repercussions of it. We would not have an ISIS had it not been for this. So if we truly care about stability in the Middle East, then we should have a very honest assessment of our own interaction and our own actions in the region, and be willing to amend those when they objectively actually have led to a worse situation for the Middle East. And on top of that, let's also be very clear, it's been devastating for the United States itself. We have lost more than $6 trillion in these wars, just in terms of money, countless lives, on both sides, of course, the fatigue and the loss of morale amongst the troops, Add to that a distrust towards the government, because to what extent can the American public continue to trust its institutions and governments when the government lied to get the United States public to support this war? That war was sold on a pack of lies. And when you have that type of a scenario, it is not that difficult then for someone like Trump to come and pursue that type of an anti-establishment message, further increase the mistrust in government, further increase the mistrust and distrust of anything that comes from U.S. government institutions, and further divide the public and the country as a whole. I'm not saying that these are directly connected in the sense that the Iraq War would have led to someone like Trump, but it created a context that made it much easier for someone like Trump to emerge.
Yeah, well, the thing is that always amazes me is that, you know, you look at Vietnam, we called Iraq our Vietnam, and, you know, some people who got tricked into the Iraq War, some of them are still alive, you know, were survivors of the Vietnam War. And then we understand Iraq was a giant mistake, a waste of resources, and that's like the least of the negativity from that war. I mean, obviously, the people who are dealing with PTSD, all the people who will never get loved ones back, who died during those conflicts and occupation, but also it's amazing how we can understand that, okay, this war was we were sold lies to get us into this war, unjust war. And then in no time, we're talking about Syria, we're talking about, you know, Gaddafi, and all of a sudden we have a new boogeyman, you know, and you see it now where, you know, I just said it on a previous podcast not too long ago in regards to how like the left thinks, you know, Russia's the boogeyman, the right thinks China's the boogeyman, and they don't realize that, like, you know, they're both kind of being lied to believe that this is, you know, this foreign country is the most dangerous country of all, you know, and it's do you think it's just the power of propaganda, the power of just confusing the public, and that they can get tricked over and over again into these unjust wars and getting involved in these conflicts?
Well, I mean, the propaganda, unfortunately, tends to be effective, and the public does tend to get swayed. But I think it's also been very clear that they've become much more savvy in many different ways. They're much more skeptical of those messages. Take a look what happened between the United States and Iran last summer, and the U.S. and Iran were quite close to war. I mean, only 10 minutes away, if Trump's own account there can be relied upon. I was worried that the public, the media, would have this approach of automatically taking what comes out of officials at face value, because that's definitely been the standard. When you take a look at how the media covered the Iraq War, or what led to the Iraq War, is quite disgraceful. I mean, whatever a U.S. official would say would automatically be treated as if it was true. There would be no scrutiny whatsoever. And that's not the job of the media, to be that type of a stenographers. They're supposed to scrutinize. And they did it. And I was afraid that we would be in that scenario again. But it's quite interesting, both back in July of last year, but also in January of this year, when the assassination of the Iranian general Soleimani occurred. It was quite interesting how quickly the media started to question all kinds of justifications that came from the Trump administration, claiming that there was an imminent threat, but there was no evidence for it. In fact, everything the U.S. government did suggested that there certainly was no imminent threat, because if there was an imminent threat, they would be calling for the staff at the embassy in Baghdad to leave. They only did that after they assassinated Soleimani, and a whole set of different things. And I was actually quite encouraged by that, in the sense that to me, it was very, very clear that there was really nothing that justified that move, and we were risking war for reasons that were extremely unclear, but certainly not the reasons that the Trump administration was putting forward. And I was encouraged to see that this time around, the media did not allow themselves to be tricked into whatever narrative the officials were putting out, but they were actually doing the scrutinizing. And that is a very good thing. It's just sad that it has come about as a result of the government having lied so extensively, particularly I'm referring to lies in selling the Iraq War. But if we retain this and approach, not in the sense of having some form of a dark skepticism, but the type of healthy skepticism and scrutiny that is needed when it comes to checking power, which is, one of the very principles of how this democracy was built. I think that's going to be very critical in order to make sure that we are not dragged into any future endless wars, mindful of how devastating they are to U.S. national interest, to the public, but also to world and to stability.
Yeah, the thing is, too, is that it doesn't matter who's in office. Our foreign policy doesn't change that much, in regards to, just being involved in other countries and intervention in so many different countries and deals with Saudi and deals with Israel. And we, do you think that's just the incredible influence of the military-industrial complex?
I think that is definitely one aspect of it. But I think it's also because for the last 25 years, there's been a completely unquestioned truth that the job and the responsibility and what is expected of the United States is to be the world's police force. And it's not until now you're starting to see that being questioned from all different directions in a much, much more sincere and effective way than before. There's always been people questioning it and raising very valid question marks about it, but it's really taking on right now. And I think those who have been advocating that line are on the defensive right now. They've never had to justify why the United States needs to have 860 military bases around the world. They never had to justify why we constantly have to remain in Afghanistan, or why we need to have provide military support to all different kinds of places or be present there, or why we need to dominate the Middle East militarily. They never had to justify it. It was like given. It was problematic to even raise those questions. That is not the scenario today. It has changed, and has changed because the public has turned against it. So I am quite optimistic about the possibility of getting more deep-rooted changes in American foreign policy, including the idea that it lies in the interest of the United States to pursue and to sustain global military domination. That idea is starting to crumble. And I think that's critical, because as long as we have that idea that this grand strategy of liberal hegemony and we have to pursue that military global domination, we will end up in endless wars. Those two ideas are connected. One is the outcome of the other. And to see that that is now being questioned, to me, is very, very encouraging.
Yeah, you are seeing a lot of that, and you're seeing it on both sides too. I feel like it's the one topic everybody can come together for. It is being anti-war and don't put any of our loved ones in harm's way unless it was because our Department of Defense used to be called the Department of War, but that sounded too offensively minded, so they needed to make it sound like we're defending ourselves. It really is one of those things where people don't realize that so much of what we're being told on TV for the purposes and the reasons why we're getting involved with certain things, there's a lot more to that story. So that's why we need researchers like yourself that we can follow and, really get some real information on what's going on, and don't just fall for the propaganda that the media sells you by saying, hey, Iran's the boogeyman, they're bad, that's it, cut and dry. Get somebody like yourself who can give you the other side of the story and let people come up with their own conclusions.
I very much appreciate.
Well, I know you got to go, so thank you so much for your time. If you can,
my pleasure. Thank you so much.
If you can, let the listeners know where they can get your work, how they can follow you.
Absolutely, they should go to quincyinst.org, which is quincyinst.org. That's the website of the Quincy Institute think tank. Our publishing platform is called Responsible Statecraft.org. And it produces some really, really thought-provoking and excellent stuff, in my view. And they should join our mailing list. And we have at least one weekly webinar that addresses these issues and brings a very non-Washington-centric perspective. I mean, he questions a lot of the first principles of American foreign policy, and would love to have the viewers check that out.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll catch up again in the near future.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Great. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Believe in the ripple effect.